Well, Australia's agriculture sector is set for its second highest income on record in this financial year, $92 billion, according to the Australian Bureau of Agriculture and Resource Economics. And it suggests the following year will be almost as good again. But those forecasts can be fragile, especially as a Category 2 cyclone bears down on Brisbane and also some of the most important farming regions in Australia, notably around the Lockyer Valley and the Northern Rivers region of New South Wales. So let's bring in here the Chief Executive of ABARES, Dr. Jared Greenville, who joins me now. Jared, there's so much to unpick here. Cyclones, global tariffs, where to start? Let's start with the cyclones, shall we, and their history. What happens generally in the past when they hit this far south in Queensland?
Yeah, no, thanks for having me on. Yeah, obviously the weather events and the cyclone at the moment are a big kind of focus for agriculture producers in that region. We produce around 2% of Australia's agriculture, like in terms of value, out of that region, and a lot of horticulture products and also some poultry. So it's a bit of a wait and see at the moment, but often some of the first round impacts are obviously the cutting of supply lines, and that's important for product that's recently been harvested or getting product out to market, but also importantly getting feed and so forth in. Then we've also got issues around livestock and getting stranded and making sure we can get feed to them. So there's a few impacts at the start, and then really once we kind of see what that plays out and then the damage that might be done, assessing what that means for farmers and their produce and their incomes later on.
But the reality is that certainly cyclones might be bad for certain regions, but the truth is that drought is much, much worse for the overall agriculture sector.
Yeah, we often see, these extreme weather events, say cyclones hit, and because Australia is such a large continent, we see them hit a fairly narrow band on the country, and it's really devastating for those who get affected by that. But when we have events like drought, they often are much more widespread, and so the last kind of significant drought that we had really spread across the whole eastern seaboard, and we saw a real big drop in our production, particularly in winter crops. And even this year, when we're seeing some of the impacts of dry conditions in South Australia and parts of Western and Victoria, and that's really had a big impact on their production levels.
But the truth is that the overall agriculture sector, it's a good story here, because when we talk about productivity, the reality is that we are producing so much more with pretty much the same resources. So productivity levels in agriculture are very high in Australia right now.
Yeah, we've seen this trend in sustainable intensification, we call it, where we're seeing agriculture produce more and more from less land, but also getting more out of those kind of poor seasonal conditions. And this year really provided a good example. So we started off the year with some pretty variable conditions in Western Australia, South Australia and Victoria, and some good, well-timed rainfall in Western Australia really led to some exceptional cropping outcomes. They managed to use what they had in a very effective way. And even in states like South Australia, which were really impacted by dry conditions, they still managed, and also late frost, they still managed to get some level of production out, which really boosted what we would otherwise seen have been quite a disastrous outcome.
Okay, there's one other aspect for farmers right now, and that is if they are export oriented, they're also getting a significant advantage because of the relatively low Australian dollar. So that also helps farm incomes.
Yeah, so we're seeing our export competitiveness being really strong in international markets across a number of areas, and we're seeing big increases, particularly in the red meat side. So beef and veal exports have gone up 20%. Australia's really consolidated its position as the world's largest sheep meat exporter. And that's leading to export values of around $73 billion this year. That's flowing through to farm cash incomes, which were expected to bounce by about 72%. It's a 72% improvement, up from $124,000 to around $213,000 on average.
So the reality is that Australia's farmers are probably in as good a shape, despite regional issues that might happen in some places, as they have been for a long, long time. And indeed, the demand, as was always talked about, from the world for Australia's food, for Australia's produce, that has not abated.
Yeah, demand on international markets remains strong, definitely, for Australian product. And there's a few factors, including, a low US beef herd that's reducing competition in some markets and increasing demand in the US. But as you say, so farm incomes really bounced back. We had a year where farm incomes really fell, where we saw declining output prices, but also increases in input prices, and that squeezed farm profits and farm incomes. And they came down from highs that were record highs back in kind of the early 2020s. But now we're in a fairly good point.
Jared Greenville, always good to chat to you on the program today. Many thanks for your time.
Excellent. Thanks again for having me on.